Hey there! Are you a crime scene investigator, law enforcement officer, or forensic scientist looking for a Facebook community that understands you? Check out Taction USA's forensic product groups. You'll find blogs, articles, information, and community. For those of us in the investigative field, there are not many lines of support out there, but Taction USA is a company that was founded by law enforcement for law enforcement. Subscribe today to get access to exclusive content. Just look for Taction USA in Facebook groups.
Hello once more, and welcome back to Crossing the Tape, your favorite true crime podcast. I am one of your hosts, Brendan, and I am joined by my wife,
Hillary?
who is the other host.
Yes.
Now, today, we're bringing you part 2 of a pretty creepy man.
Yeah, he's quite creeps.
Yeah, we mentioned it last time, he's sort of the poster boy for serial killing.
Yes.
If you were gonna make one from scratch, you would put all the ingredients of this guy in there.
He kind of checks all the boxes, and some of his behavior kind of shows up in other serial killers later.
Yes.
But we do want to let you know that listener discretion is advised, because this is not a pleasant topic.
No. So, please sign the crime scene log and keep that in mind.
Yes.
It might get a little dark, but we mentioned before, there's an importance to learning about these topics, even if they're difficult.
Yes.
But hey, math is difficult, and people do that.
True.
But this is a different kind of difficult.
Yeah. But it is important to understand the criminal mind to help maybe keep this from happening, recognize signs, understand behavior. So that's why we dive into this. It's not particularly pleasant.
No.
But it's important to be aware of these types of behaviors.
Yes.
So our recap, this poster child of serial killing, sadly, is Jerry Brudos. And he was verbally abused as a child, and in our last episode we went through how he began to show signs of being a genuine psychopath at a very early age. And he escalated his behavior pretty quickly and went from stealing women's shoes and underwear to holding girls at knife point.
Yes, and his mother had wanted him to be born a girl.
Yes.
It wasn't, so she took that out. It was terrible to him
for
his whole childhood.
She held that against him, which didn't help his already quirky behavior.
Right, now he's got serious issues with women.
Yes. So Jerry Brudos was released from the psychiatric facility. That's where we left him in the last episode. And he graduated from high school. So he was admitted as a juvenile. Mm-hmm. And he then joined the Army. And following that time, he committed 2 more offenses. And there was some more information about his time in the Army, but it's not really relevant to what we're presenting here. So
right, I'm sure it taught him a bit more discipline that he probably carried into his new line of work. But
he still had some other, not offenses in the Army. He would have been kicked out, but he had certain quirky personality traits that other soldiers noticed. Mm-hmm. They didn't really point directly to his behavior and his violent behavior, but they thought it was strange.
People could tell he was a little screwy.
Yeah, but he, for the most part, behaved himself in the Army. But following that time, he committed 2 more offenses. In 1960, he followed a discreetly clothed woman to her apartment and strangled her unconscious and took her shoes. So he basically saw a girl, she wasn't wearing very much, but he liked her shoes and followed her to steal her shoes. The next victim was a woman wearing high heels, and he tried to strangle her, but the woman fought him, and she left with 1 shoe. And Jerry kept both shoes from both incidences and he was not arrested for either of these offenses. Never caught. But again, it kind of points to his general escalating behavior from just stealing shoes to attacking women.
Right, and before you mentioned he had held women at knife point.
Yes.
So now he's strangling them unconscious.
Yeah.
So it's not armed robbery anymore, it's a full-on attack, nearly killing them.
Yes, so it has escalated. Even though there's no knife involved now, it's escalated in a different sense.
It's more dangerous for the victims now.
Not long after that, he was able to get a job at a radio station, and he started hanging around a 17-year-old named Ralphine Schwinter.
What a name.
I know.
Ralphine Schwinter.
Schwinter. She should just go by RS. He took her to his parents' house and brought her into the family, wanted her to meet everybody, and eventually his parents' home would be where most of his offenses would escalate to murder. So that was the murder house.
It was his own parents' home.
Yes.
Ugh.
In 1961, Jerry and Ralphine married, and she was already pregnant with their first child. They lived in Portland and then relocated to another home. They had a daughter, later a son, and Brudos held a job and a side gig. So Jerry was doing all right at this point.
Miss Jerry and Ralphine, just the best couple you can imagine.
At least as far as we know, at this point. It appears he was never abusive towards his wife. However, he did request she often do her housework without clothes and in high heels. And most of the time she entertained these quirks without question. And in the other episode, we went into how, this is an offender with particular fetishes. Mm-hmm. And his fetishes are what drive his violent behavior. But apparently his wife just thought, it was quirky, but she didn't care, and she went ahead and,
That's what he liked.
Yeah,
so
that's what he likes? Okay.
But it makes you wonder, too. Because it pleased him when she would undress, put on high heels, and then do the housework. So he doesn't need to be violent to get,
what he wants.
His excitement from the shoes.
No,
and to tie that in with sexuality.
No, and...
But he chooses...
He chooses to.
To go about that in a violent way.
Because I didn't want to get into too much detail, but, that was... She would start cleaning, he'd have her undress, and then things would lead to the bedroom. So he was getting what he wanted.
Right.
And he could have worn her shoes if he wanted to at this point.
She didn't mind this thing. So.
Yeah. As his wife was having their second child, though, he followed a woman to her apartment, choked her unconscious, and later said he could not help but rape her, and then took her shoes.
Oh, so that's what it is. He just couldn't help it.
He just couldn't help it.
That's all.
Yeah.
He could watch his wife do scantily clad chores, but he just can't help himself.
So that shows you the level of maybe unremorse, no remorse that he had.
Right.
And later he was caught stealing women's clothing and shoes at a dormitory, and when he was arrested for that offense because he was caught in the act, he was wearing women's clothing.
Ugh, what an embarrassing way to go to jail.
like, and the description was pretty comical. Like, he had women's pants on, but a man's shirt and high heels and women's underwear. I don't know. It was very strange.
Was he wearing a wig?
I don't think so. But it was
So he didn't want to do up his hair.
It was a mix match of things. Probably what he stole. He probably was dressed in everything he
probably
stole.
Just put everything on and was going to walk out casually.
Like that episode of Friends when Joey puts all of Chandler's clothes on.
This is just what they had in the closet.
But anyhow, the point is, while his wife is having their second child, he's not there at the hospital. No. He's following other women, choking them and having sex. Not consensual. Raping. So... He's attacking women while his wife's having their child.
Right. He has more important things to do, apparently.
Yeah. This one, I'll be honest, I wanted to get into this particular serial killer because I'd never heard of him. And because he is the poster child for understanding criminal behavior.
Right.
But it's really awful and dark. It took me longer to research this one than normal because it was bothersome. The murders began in 1968, and they occurred for 2 years, and there were 4 total. His MO was strangulation, and each woman was abducted, made to dress according to his whims. He would photograph them, pleasure himself, and then kill them. And most of the reports said that even after they were deceased, he'd have his way with them too. His trophies from each murder were body parts. So we're not talking about he took their underwear and put them in a drawer. Jeez. He would keep like their feet with the shoes on them.
So we've got necrophilia.
Yes.
Strangulation. The foot fetish.
Dismemberment.
The sexual assaults.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a real mixed bag of trouble.
Yeah, and the worst kind.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, these acts usually occurred while his wife and children were at home. They all lived in, the house that they bought when they were married. Mm-hmm. But from everything I read, it seemed like they kind of went back and forth between the parents' house mm-hmm. and their own home.
Oh, okay.
And so some of these offenses he would just do at the parents' home. And I think he would keep his trophies there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that was a little bit convoluted. I wasn't quite sure. But some of these acts would begin at home with his wife and children there, and then he would take the people, like the victims, over to the other house. Again, kind of convoluted. I couldn't find exactly which house.
Where which offense happened.
But it kind of seemed like he'd go back and forth.
He used both spaces, regardless.
So, unfortunately, his wife and children were at home when these things would happen, whether they're in the same home or they're in the house that was, nearby. Mm-hmm. They were not to enter his workspace, his at-home workspace, without asking on an intercom first if they could come in. So he installed...
Don't even knock on the door.
Right. He installed an intercom to say, for his wife and children, to ask if they could come into his space.
Jeez.
So
he didn't even want them near the door.
No.
Where they could just knock and say, "Hey, Pop, dinner's ready."
No.
You had to call him via intercom.
So before we get into each murder victim, let's hear from the National Investigative Training Academy. If you are looking for a career change or to expand your knowledge in an already established one, look no further than the National Investigative Training Academy. The National Investigative Training Academy, or NITA, N-I-T-A, has well over 100 courses with 70 professional development ones alone. NITA is constantly adding to their course catalog, and courses are focused on private investigation and security fields. Whether you would like to become a private investigator or you need continuing education for your investigative or security career, the National Investigative Training Academy is for you. All courses offered are 100% online and do at your own pace. Once completed, you will receive a certificate in that course. Sign up today at investigativeacademy.com. Make sure when you sign up for your courses, you mention we sent you there. We encourage you to get the best investigative and security training possible today. When you sign up, mention our brand ambassador code, BA2367. That's BA2367. And you can find those courses at investigativeacademy.com. Look for links in our show notes as well. Before we get into each murder, I wanted to mention that BTK, a serial killer in the 1970s, showed similar traits to Jerry Brudos. Perhaps Brudos influenced him, as well as Ed Kemper, another serial killer who had some of the traits of Brudos, but Brudos seemed to have both of their traits and more, which is quite unnerving. His first murder victim was Linda Slauson, who was only 19. She was a saleswoman for encyclopedias, one of those door-to-door. Mm-hmm. Jerry was in his yard when Linda approached him, thinking that she was at his neighbor's home. When she explained what she was selling, Jerry pretended to be interested and welcomed her inside. As she proudly explained her product to him, he hit her on the head from behind, strangled her, and had sex with her body. He also kept her body in the basement for quite a while and would redress her and photograph her.
Jeez.
He then decided to get rid of her body by dismembering her and put her appendages in different places, keeping one foot.
Dude.
He also saved some of the encyclopedias she was trying to sell him. which was not very smart.
No.
You know, if he's
Where'd you get all these?
Well, if he's going to get caught, she was an encyclopedia salesman.
Yeah, encyclopedia saleswoman missing.
Right.
That's weird. Hey,
but how...
Jerry just got a new set.
Right, but how awful. Like I said, none of this is easy.
No.
The second victim was Jan Whitney, a 23-year-old. Jerry happened upon her as she was waiting on the side of the road with her car that had broken down. Later, he would claim that both this murder and the first one were murders of opportunity, not premeditated. He told her he could repair her vehicle, but he would have to drive her to his home to get some tools. He strangled her in the car and placed her body in his workshop, just like with Linda. He dressed Jan up and had his way with her body for a few days. Mm-hmm. Very, very awful. So the third murder was Karen Sprinker. She was 18 years old and a college student. He abducted her, holding her at gunpoint. So he has even escalated, you know, with his first murder, he hit her over the head. Mm-hmm. That's escalating. You know, before he would strangle them and hadn't killed them yet.
Right.
And then with the knife, he never used it to cut anybody. It was a threat. But even the item he chose to start threatening women escalated. So now we're talking about a gun. Mm-hmm. He abducted her, holding her at gunpoint at a department store. And when he confronted her, Jerry was wearing women's clothing. Originally, he had been chasing a different girl. And she got away, and then he saw Karen. And though he held her at gunpoint, he made the false promise that he would not harm her. He took her to his workshop, raped her, strangled her, disposed of her body later. So he didn't keep her for some reason. Yeah. And I couldn't figure out why some girl, there was never any description of the women, of why.
Like if he kept the blonde ones, but didn't.
Right. Why did he keep certain ones? I don't know. With a mind like that, there is no rationale. So
no. And it doesn't sound like there's a ton of reason for any of this either.
No. Again.
I mean, like he doesn't have a particular dump site where he hides the bodies, where he's confident no one will find them. He just cuts them up after, puts the body parts in places and moves on. He
also, it doesn't have a certain type. You know, I never found a description of every female victim. So he doesn't have a certain type. Like, you know, there's one serial killer that, you know, they liked redheads. You know, and there's some that, you know, like blondes. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find anything that he liked a particular type of woman either. Yeah. And it is interesting that he abducted her, Karen, while he's wearing women's clothes. So it's not like his motive, quote unquote, was to get women's clothing.
Right. He has that. He had clothing, and especially from the last victims or whatever he had stolen. Because he was only caught stealing clothes the one time. Yes. Doesn't mean he didn't do that every other weekend. Right. And he's got a whole wardrobe of various outfits.
In addition to his murder victims, he also tried to abduct 2 girls, but they were both able to fight for their life and escape. His final victim, and we'll get into those abductions later, it comes into play. His final victim was Linda Sally, a 22-year-old who he abducted at a shopping mall. So again, it is similar to Karen's in that he abducted her at a department store. This is a shopping mall. Mm-hmm. So that location is similar. But that's also a good place to look for young women. Right. This time, he impersonated a police officer when he abducted her. And unfortunately, Linda suffered the same fate as the other girls. So I think, as far as my research found, the only one he didn't keep was Karen. I don't know why. I mean, he
probably doesn't know why.
No. And it's no wonder, because of all of these murders and attempted abductions, that Jerry Brudos became known as the Lust Killer. In the midst of the murders he committed, he did attempt to abduct 2 girls that I mentioned. They were able to escape. One of these women would help investigators later catch this monster. In April of 1969, Jerry tried to kidnap the women, and one was 24, the other 15. He held both at gunpoint, but one fought him and escaped, and the other screamed for help as she was passing by someone on a sidewalk. And that one was interesting because he tried to abduct her at gunpoint. She went with him. They're walking down a sidewalk in broad daylight in front of people's houses.
Well,
she screamed at a woman in her yard, and it scared him, and he fled off. And it was the second of these victims' description of Jerry that would help law enforcement catch him later. So he was also getting very brazen. Instead of breaking in, remember in the first episode, he had masks.
Right.
And then he would come back and say he was Jerry's twin brother. Which is bizarre.
Yeah.
But it would seem that Jerry at this time was unstoppable. But as for most killers, that's not the case, thankfully. In May of 1969, investigators had gathered enough information from the 15-year-old he had attempted to take. Jerry was found by highway patrol officers, and at the time, he was hiding under a blanket as his wife drove their vehicle. So the wife was in the car. He was on the floorboard under a blanket.
Ducked down.
Mm-hmm. While in custody, he even asked his wife to destroy evidence, which she did refuse to. Jerry was questioned even more after police uncovered items in his garage. These items were directly connected to the missing girls, and one of those items, unfortunately, was the first girl's foot.
It's probably still with the shoe.
Mm-hmm. And I read on one of the murders, he kept an appendage or two, but they started decomposing, and then he'd get rid of them.
Right.
So, still very demented behavior. Jerry, of course, denied any connection at first to the girls. However, the more he was questioned, the more he became comfortable. And the more he became comfortable, the more he began to describe his tendencies and his fetishes. So at first, he's denying everything. He doesn't want anything to do with this. He doesn't want to have a connection. He doesn't want to be caught. Mm-hmm. But the investigators must have been very good at interviewing because they finally got him comfortable enough that he just started talking about things on his own.
Well, I like feet and strangulation.
Things that related to these missing girls.
Yeah.
So from there, law enforcement was able to make an accurate assessment of Jerry and pinpointed his psychopathic tendencies. By June, he had confessed to all 4 homicides. He claimed most of the murders were committed out of opportunity. He also went on to say he didn't hate women, but did admit that murders helped him to de-stress.
Dude.
So
I can't imagine anything more
stressful
than doing something like that and then trying to act like you didn't.
Like, how often?
Most people would have a breakdown before long trying to keep a secret like that.
Right. But with him...
That's how he unwinds.
It's insanity.
Smoke a joint or something.
Yeah.
Not this.
Yeah. He was charged with the murders of Whitney, Sprinker, and Sally, as these were the 3 that they had the most evidence on. He entered a plea of not guilty due to insanity. However, what I thought was quite interesting and a little comical was he was evaluated once again by several doctors who all unanimously said he is sane. So I thought that was a little bit comical because he went, well, I can just play the insanity card.
Yeah. And
they went, no, I don't think so.
Well, and taking a step back and looking at him and all the stuff he's done, yeah, that guy's nuts.
He is.
However,
yes.
He's competent to stand trial.
Yes.
And that's what counts.
Yes.
He might be insane, but insanity as a defense is more, you understand what you did?
Yeah.
He understands. That's why he did it. He had a blast. In August
of 1969, his wife Ralphine was indicted for first-degree murder because a witness claimed they saw her assisting Jerry abducting one of the victims. And it's interesting that just the witness statement got the wife an actual murder charge. I thought that stood out to me. I thought, wow.
That's a hell of a statement.
Yes. Like, what kind of statement are we talking about that she got an actual murder charge? Not manslaughter either.
Right. They charged her full on. She was just as guilty as Jerry.
However, charges were dropped as another witness that came forward to the incident was able to disprove the original witness's statement. She was, however, charged with being an accessory to Jerry's crimes. However, once again, she was acquitted. And after that, she divorced him and changed her name. So don't blame her.
About time.
Don't blame her.
And she's very lucky that she didn't get found guilty, at least of being an accessory. Because how do you convince a jury that yeah, this was going on in my house for 2 years, but I just had no idea.
Well, and my thing too is at the very least, when he's hiding under the blanket on the floorboard, if we were driving down the highway and you told me to do that, what did you do?
Take the wheel, I gotta hide. What's going on?
Yeah, what's happening here? But no, she just did it.
All right. Well, she sounds like she didn't mind listening to whatever he told her to do.
Yeah.
And we talked about early on, he wanted her to do housework in the nude with high heels.
Yeah.
And
she,
it wasn't even like for a birthday or anniversary.
Right.
All right, fine. That's how I'll do the dishes then, I guess.
I did read that later on, though, when their children were older, she refused to do that, obviously, because that'd be traumatizing. And maybe that's where he escalated to.
Right, when he didn't have that outlet at home.
Yeah.
He decided he needed to go back on the prowl.
So while in prison, he was surprisingly well behaved, and he was even permitted to have catalogs that showed women in high heels.
I guess.
I mean, to each their own,
satiate
but
the beast or something.
He remained.
I probably figured it's easier to let him have a Sears catalog than strangle one of his cellmates.
Right. He remained at the Oregon State Penitentiary until his death, which was liver cancer, in 2006. While he was in prison, his wife divorced him, and he was often beaten up in prison because he was a known sex offender.
I'm just so upset by that fact. I can't believe it. I'm tearing up as we speak.
I see. During parole hearings, he was asked if he felt any remorse, and I was surprised he even had parole, given the level of depravity his crimes were.
Yeah, that may be some state-required thing.
It's
just for show, just to say they gave him a chance.
So during his parole hearings, he was asked if he ever felt remorse. He said he cared as much about the women he victimized as he did about a wad of paper.
Woof.
Yeah.
At least he's honest.
Ugh. But, I can't imagine that level of hatred and depravity with no reason.
Well, and most people would lie and say, I feel terrible about what I did, and if you let me out, I'll never do it again.
But that denotes to his psychopathic behavior.
He didn't even care to pretend.
No. He was never charged with Linda Slauson's murder. However, later there were photos of her appendages found that he had kept. It's not proven whether these photos were taken before or after death, and her body was never found. Jan Whitney's body was found 1 month after his conviction. So he was charged for her murder, and then her body resurfaced, I believe, in a river after he was convicted, which good timing. It further proved.
Yeah, in case there was any leftover doubt.
So, though this case is dark, it's a good reminder of the level of illness that some criminals have. And the more we understand human behavior, the better we can help reduce these types of crimes from reoccurring.
Yes.
So it's good to understand all of this, because if there are signs, for investigators, if they see signs of somebody's criminal behavior and it's constantly escalating, they can be more closely watched, maybe get them some help,
Well, you mentioned the shared traits between some of these, like BTK, obviously strangulation and
he dressed up in women's clothing.
Yeah, they both shared that. Ed Kemper, I believe he had some issues with people's appendages.
Yes.
Same
thing
here. It's
so unfortunately
strange how different the MO and everything. How different the person can be, how different their pool of victims could be, but how similar.
Yeah.
Like the way they carry it out.
Mm-hmm. And, sadly, I don't know. I wonder if Jerry Brudos was the poster child and kind of, I hate to say inspiration for other serial killers, but it almost seems that way.
Right. Makes you wonder how much
they knew
those later serial killers had seen in the papers and did someone come across something and think, I wonder how interesting that would be to try.
Ugh, scary. It's a scary thought. But as you said, it is interesting how an individual can be very different. Their background can be extremely different.
Mm-hmm.
But their desire can be almost the same, and their method to go about, satisfying that is almost the same.
Right. Once you slip into criminal insanity,
right,
there's a lot of differences and a lot of similarities.
There's a lot of similarities, which is why we learn from that. Learn to recognize these patterns, maybe so that not so many people are victims.
Well, the importance of the behaviors before they do anything criminal, learning early childhood.
Yeah.
When they start showing signs.
Oh, yeah.
What happened to them that at the age of 12 or whatever, he's holding girls captive and trying to steal their shoes.
Well, and that is a good point, because I used to be a preschool teacher before I got into investigation as a career. But I would notice children who were very young, we'll say 2 and 3, if they hurt somebody in the class, and most children, you ask them, did you hurt them? Some kids cry. They're immediately
they
remorseful.
Don't know how to handle.
They just, oh my gosh, they're instantly, they cry.
They don't want to be in trouble. They feel bad. They didn't mean it.
But I had a few kids that they would laugh when someone was hurt. They would laugh even more if they hurt the person. And that always worried me. I was always keeping an eye out on those kids in case something needed to be, professional needed to be called in.
Right. And I'm sure for a lot of kids that have that, it kind of irons itself out as they get older. They develop those feelings of remorse, or they at least understand why that was wrong. Right. But there's some segment that it just never occurs to them what the issue is, and it has the potential to escalate into hurting people like this, in this way. Right.
So that's all we have for you today. We appreciate you listening.
Yes, go watch a funny show.
Yeah. Watch something light, put on something, comical.
Frasier.
Yeah, we love that show.
It's always a good palate cleanser for things like this. Nothing bad happens to Frasier.
No, if it does, it works out.
But until next time, we thank you for joining us, and we ask that you sign the crime scene log on the way out.
Stay safe.
And so long.